name is Kate Summers. I am the LLC lead and current Year 6 teacher at Glasllwch Primary School. I'm going to talk you through today something that we have been using at Glasllwch Primary School for a few years now, which is a slow approach to writing. I currently work in Year 6, but I've worked in Year 2 and Year 4 as well, and we've used this approach that I'm going to talk about across all three and the year groups in between, and it's been really successful for us. Getting children to write can at times be a real challenge. Often I hear in my class and other classes I've taught in, I don't know what to write, I don't know how to start writing, what do I do? I've got no ideas. And that can be a struggle, getting children to start their writing. And then sometimes once they've started, they're in the flow, aren't they? And they're okay. You can often see kind of slightly boring writing, just simple sentence after simple sentence after simple sentence with no different sentence constructions, no real kind of interest to the reader. At times, again, you can see absolutely no full stops. Still in my Year 6 class, there's occasions when people just forget to use a full stop at all. And that can be really infuriating and frustrating. And very difficult sometimes for children to go back and add the full stops in once they've finished their writing. Or if you are seeing full stops, perhaps there's a lack of varied punctuation in what children are producing. It might be that there are no commas, you're not seeing a lot of exclamation marks or question marks, or as you get further up the school, more complex punctuation. And this approach that I'm going to talk you through today has helped address some of those issues really well. So what I'm going to talk you through is something that's called slow writing. It was introduced in Glasllwch in around 2016, 2017. So we've been using it for a number of years now, and it works really well alongside our Alan Peat sentences that, again, we've been using for a really long time and have found a lot of success with. It's used as a scaffold in our literacy lessons. It can be adapted to be used across the school. As I said, it has been used from Year 2 up to Year 6 really successfully. So slow writing is something that we haven't developed. It was discovered by the Year 6 teacher a few years ago, was doing some professional learning and came across slow writing, which had been developed by this man called David Didow in 2008. He was, or maybe still is, I'm not sure, a secondary English teacher, but also a writer, a blogger and a literacy trainer. He has a blog called The Learning Spy, which is actually really useful. And if you're interested in more information about slow writing after listening to me go on about it, he has some blog posts about how he's developed it and some updated blog posts as well about how things have changed for him and how he's been finding things. So The Learning Spy is a really good literacy blog if you're interested in that. So the Year 6 teacher at the time found it on this blog and was interested in it. The background behind why he developed this process is because as a secondary school English teacher, he was really trying to raise those pupils that were on the CD borderline at GCSE, who were really struggling to get into that C bracket, and he was trying to find something that would help them achieve that grade. And he speaks a lot about making the implicit explicit and making what writing should be and how you write really obvious and as obvious as it can be to the learner. So he says on his blog, a lot of the writing practice students get results in mediocre writing. This means that they carry around poor quality mental representations of what writing should look like, and they end up getting better at writing badly. To escape this trap, students need to practice writing well, and for that, they'll probably need effective scaffolds. I'm sure scaffolds are being used for lots of different types of writing already. The slow writing scaffolds, which we'll come on to in a second, are very narrow and very specific to help writers really hone in on certain qualities in their writing. He says that writing isn't just about what you write, but how you write it down, and that novice writers lack this skill. They lack in experience. They maybe haven't read widely enough to know what's effective. So they really need, as he said, being taught explicitly how to do these things. What he was finding, which I can absolutely identify with, is that often students are writing what they know in really simple formats as quickly as they can, and perhaps are just regurgitating ideas that are in their brain, regurgitating facts if they're writing non-fiction writing, rather than thinking about how am I going to make this writing clear, how am I going to make it interesting, how am I going to make it varied to the reader. So he says that giving pupils sentence prompts frees up their working memory so that they can shape what they know in a more sophisticated way. They don't need to necessarily think too much about what they're going to write next. It's about how they're going to form those sentences. It slows children down and makes them think about the technique. It's slow by name and slow by nature. The work that you get from the children doing this might not be very extended when you use the slow writing structure. It needs to be slow because children should really be thinking about the technique and the quality of what they're writing. And as it says at the bottom there, it really is about quality rather than quantity when using slow writing scaffolds. So the idea when we break down our slow writing and introduce it to the children, this is kind of the process that we're thinking about when we are beginning to plan and delivering slow writing sessions. So to start with, when we are teaching children different writing forms or different writing strategies or different text types, it's about explaining why something is effective for different purposes and for that particular text type. As I said, we use lots of the Allen Peet sentence structures within school. And when we are teaching those and delivering those lessons, when we're introducing different structures, it's about also how you would write those different sentence types, but when different sentence types are appropriate for different text types. Not all sentences will fit in everything. More descriptive, adjective-full sentences are going to be most appropriate at times for kind of fiction or story writing and descriptive writing, rather than in a factual report. So it's about explaining why something is going to be effective in the text we're going to write. Then it's about modelling that to the children, creating a model text and showing them this is what a really good piece of writing looks like. Using that model, then we scaffold it. And we can use the slow writing structure to do that as we pick apart the model text and see how it's been written. Then children are given time to practice using that scaffold and the slow writing structure. And then children are given some time to reflect on that. They might want to edit it, go back, revise things, check against the success criteria, and do peer or self-assessment at this point, which then should all lead to independent writing, where the slow writing structures, the slow writing scaffolds are removed from different writing tasks, and children should, after lots of practice and lots of scaffolding and lots of modelling, be able to recognise how to write a quality text and use what they've learned when using the scaffolds independently in their own writing. So this is an example structure that you might see from a traditional slow writing scaffold. You can see there that things have been broken down sentence by sentence. So it's not paragraph by paragraph. It's literally this sentence needs to be this type of sentence. The next sentence needs to be this type of sentence. So we've got here the first sentence in this piece of writing. The children would have to start that sentence with a verb. The second sentence must contain a simile. The third sentence must use a complex sentence. The fourth must only be 3 words long. And the last one there needs to start with a time connective. So children have to really think about the words they're going to use, the content of that kind of sentence and how it's going to flow, and slow down and really think about each sentence, breaking it down into tiny kind of minute details to make sure they're writing effectively. So that would be a traditional slow writing structure. As I said, we are using the Allen Peet sentences, and we found that they fit really well with the slow writing structure and allowed children to use a variety, allow children to practice using them and use them effectively. So what a slow writing structure that you might see in a piece of work here at Glasllwch would have these types of prompts as well. So the first sentence might be a verb person sentence, if you're familiar with Allen Peet sentences. The second one, they'd need to use a the more sentence, and so on and so forth. Children would be familiar with these sentences before using them with scaffolds, obviously. So before you can go into a slow write with your class, you do need to have some preparation time as the teacher before you can deliver something. You can't just use a generic slow write scaffold for your children. It might not fit the type of text type you want your children to be writing. It might not be appropriate for the age and stage of the children in your class. So you do need to prepare the scaffold beforehand so that children are using things that are appropriate. So you need to think to yourself, what do you actually want your pupils to achieve? What is the desired end goal? What do you ideally want your children's writing to look like? Once you've thought about that, what types of sentence types or punctuation will lend itself to the genre? As I said, the Alan Peake ones that we use, some fit better in fiction, some fit better in non-fiction. So you need to decide what's going to work really effectively in the type of text that I want my children to be writing. Then you can look at the stimulus that you're using, whether you're going from a rich text or you're going from a picture or a short film or an advert or something. So look at the stimulus that you're going to be giving the children to write from and decide on appropriate sentence structures that would fit for the stimulus. We would then create our own example, our model text, using all of those secret sentences or different sentence constructions or different things that are appropriate for the text type to guide the choices that the children kind of pick out. And then we give children the tools to access the task, which I will go on to in a minute. So some examples of things then that we have done in school and how we delivered it, I'll go through next. So this here is a year 6 piece of writing based on Chaperon Rouge. This is a short film which can be found on the Literacy Shed. And we were doing some descriptive writing. We used the slow writing structure for the middle part of their writing. So we didn't slow write all of it. We picked kind of the tense, exciting bit in the Chaperon Rouge video, and we were using a slow write structure to write the middle section. And we did that first before we wrote the beginning and the end. So to start this bit of writing, we would give the children some time to practice the secret sentences, which we call the Alan Peake sentences, the Alan Peake sentences that I would already have thought are going to be appropriate for the text that they're going to be writing. So we're recapping, practicing the sentences so that they're ready to use those sentence structures in their writing. So I would give them this picture here, which is linked to what we're going to write about. Chaperon Rouge, if you've not seen it, is kind of a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood. So this picture here is linked. So they practice, we check they understood the rules of the different sentences, that they have the punctuation in the right place, etc., before we started writing. Again, before we start writing, we might look at vocabulary that would be appropriate for the text that we want to write. So you can see there on the screen the blue boxes, which is the shades of meaning, which you might be familiar with. This is where you give children a strip of paper and allow them either to have a word bank, potentially if they're in the lower year groups or kind of less confident with their literacy, or a thesaurus or an online thesaurus, if you've got children that are able to access those, and pick synonyms for words that you think might be used in the text you're doing. So for Chaperon Rouge, there's a bit of a chase scene that they're going to write about, and the kind of Red Riding Hood character would probably be quite scared. So the children are probably going to use that word. But to up-level their vocabulary, you'd look at other words for scared. And with the shades of meaning, they kind of pick the most powerful versions of scared. So the weakest word would be scared. Can you find better words for that you could input into your writing? So we do a little bit of work on that as well. You might give them, though, other vocabulary word maps that they can use during their writing task as well. We've got there how we display our Alan Peake sentences. There are kind of top secret sentences, so reminders of the rules for writing those sentences so they can check they are constructing them correctly and putting the punctuation marks in the right place. And then, as always, we'd have success criteria to make sure children are using what they should be and keeping kind of the on the boil things there as well. So making sure, for example, they've got their capital letters in, and anything else we might have discussed when discussing descriptive writing beforehand. So then we kind of talked about things, and I would then show them the model that I had prepared previously. when typing up and thinking about this model, I thought about what sentences and what type of sentence constructions or punctuation marks are going to fit with kind of a tense bit of descriptive writing, which is the middle bit of our story. And I would have prepared this beforehand because I want children's writing to be similar to this. I want the quality to be similar. So I'd go through the example and we'd read it as a class. So scrambling, she raced through the derelict city and into the forest. Petrified, panicked, disorientated, she glanced behind her at the shadowy silhouettes that were hunting her. The wolves had blood-red, menacing eyes and vicious, pointed fangs. The mysterious creatures were like ghosts, but seemed so real. The more terrified she became, the more the wolves snapped at her ankles. Suddenly, she tripped. She looked up and the wolves were gone. Was it her imagination, a dream, or something else? So I'd read that to them, and hopefully they'd recognise that that's quite an effective piece of writing for what we need to do. And because the children in my class would be familiar with lots of these sentence types from practicing it previously, often when I'm reading things like, oh, I can spot a 2AD, or oh, I can spot a many questions, they can do that independently. So then as a class, we pick apart my model. What have I used to make my writing really effective? And here we can see my sentence choices. I've chosen these to make a successful piece of writing. So the children should be able to pick all these out themselves because we've previously practiced all of the things that I've used to make it accessible to them. So you can see my first sentence there is a third person, my second sentence is a 3ED sentence, my third sentence is a 4AD sentence, then I've used a boy sentence, which has also got a simile in it, and so on and so forth. So we pick that apart with the children and they can recognise those different sentence constructions themselves. And then that model, and when we've picked it apart sentence by sentence, then transforms into our slow writing structure. The children in my class are going to use exactly the same structure as me to ensure they are using varied sentence constructions. Those sentence constructions have varied punctuation marks in them, and they are different lengths to make our writing really effective. And they are going to then write their own version using exactly the same structure, using the vocabulary that we've looked at, the words they've chosen to be most effective, and so on and so forth. If you've got children in your class that need a little bit of extra help, or you're using this with children lower down in the school, you might also give them a differentiated slow writing structure. So they'll be writing the same sentence constructions. They can use the sentence rules if you use those alongside, so make those available to check that they're using them correctly, or if they've forgotten what a boy's sentence is, they've got a reference point to look back to. But if you are thinking there's going to be someone that's going to say, I still don't know what to write, we might also give them extra prompts there that you can see, which says what that sentence needs to be about as well. So our first sentence needs to be a verb person sentence, but you're going to describe how the girl moves and where she is going. So it's breaking it down and making it even more explicit to them. You need to write about this. It needs to be in this sentence construction, but now you're going to do it in the best way that you can. So that's quite a nice way of differentiating, and children often get on really well with that. So as they're writing then, we've picked things apart, we've said what was worked really well. This is kind of maybe a little help sheet that we might give out. So we've got, as you can see there, different words. We've got a bit of a word map that children can refer to as they're writing. And then we've got our kind of structure and a bit of a success criteria for this small bit of writing. There are only 8 sentences. You need to be including these things. Children then, after they've used the structure and they've written, will need some time to reflect on that and go back and check things make sense, check that they have got their spelling right, check they've got the punctuation in those different sentence constructions correct, and make sure that things flow and that things make sense, and whether they have chosen the best vocabulary that they can for the piece that they've written. So there does need to be some reflection time for editing their work and revising it and seeing if they want to make any changes or adaptations. In order to make this quite easy, because our piece of writing won't be massively extended because it's only a small paragraph that we are slow writing and that we structured so narrowly, the older children in particular, who find this kind of different pattern of writing easier, might leave a line between each line they write that you can kind of see on the screen there. This gives them space to go back and then make some edits. So for example, here we got scrambling. She ran with a derelict sitting into the forest. The reader or the writer, sorry, when they're editing and revising, might think that I want to see if I can find a better word for derelict. I don't think that sounds great. Once I've gone back and read it, I want to change it. Or similarly at the end sentence there, maybe there's a better word I could use for hunting. So I'm going to underline that, and I'm going to use a thesaurus or the word mat or whatever you provided to pick a better option. And then leaving a line between each bit of writing gives them the space to make those changes really clearly, so they're not scribbling out loads of things and making their work really complicated to understand. So they might change derelict to dilapidated, you can see there, or they might change hunting to stalking once they've done a little bit of vocabulary work themselves. So that's been quite nice for our learners to do to make their editing easier. Sometimes you get them scribbling out all over the place and they've got arrows going everywhere. And then when they've got to write those things up neatly, it's really confusing for them. And then as a teacher, it can be really confusing because you can't see where their mind was at the time. So that's quite a nice, neat way of making some edits and some adaptations there. So this is some examples of what we got from doing that with a year 6 class a few years ago. So this here is one of our kind of less confident writers using the build-up that we would have had. We've done vocabulary, we've looked at a model, we've broken it down, we've given them a slow writing structure, they've had secret sentence rules to help them. This is what they produced. Any spelling mistakes in here are their spelling mistakes. It's just been typed up exactly as they handwrote it. So they're writing based on what we've done with our lower ability writers was this. With speed, Red Riding Hood rushed up the hill and into the gloomy, terrifying forest. Terrified, mortified, she glanced over her shoulder and saw the shadow of the wood. The wolves had black, mysterious bodies with razor-sharp, deadly fangs. She was trying to escape from the wolves. They were like the devil's guards. The more she raced, the more the devil's guards chased her. Suddenly, she tripped. She looked behind her, and the monster wasn't there. Was she going to die? Was she hurt? Where were the monsters? So you can see here that there's, some things that could be improved on. Spelling is obviously something that they are finding difficult here. And a couple of the word choices, for example, in the second sentence there, they've reused terrified and terrified twice. But despite those things, this is, I think, a really nice piece of writing from someone that finds writing quite difficult. They have got lots of varied sentence structures in there. They have used a variety of different commas. They've used different sentence lengths. They have written a tense piece of writing there with some nice descriptions of what's going on in the film that we've looked at. And their vocabulary choices, although not always spelt correctly, have been considered really well. I really like, they were like the devil's guards, for example, as a simile. They worked really hard on that. And that's because they didn't really have to think too much about what they were writing. They were told each sentence needs to be like this, but it's your choice how you construct that. So they've got the brain space to think about their word choice and how they're going to kind of use similes, for example. We've got kind of a middly type of writing, then someone that's kind of in the middle of our writing. So their example was sprinting, the girl ran through the deep, dark forest. Worried, petrified, terrified, the girl dashed away from the dark soul of death. The wolf had vicious, pointed fangs and a black, dull body. The wolf had eyes like blood. The more the dark soul of death caught up with the girl, the more frightened she became. Suddenly she tripped. The bloodthirsty devil chased after the terrified girl. Was it a dream, her imagination, or something else? So again, a really nice piece of writing. Both of the two have used ellipsis as well to kind of create an effect there for tension. And then one of our more confident writers also had the same structure to construct their bit of writing. So they got scurrying, she dashed through the cast-off city and into the funeral forest. Alarmed, frightened, fossilized, she glanced back nervously at the shadowy phantoms that were charging at her. The monsters had blood-red, possessed eyes and savage, unblunted fangs. The monstrous beings were like spiritual wolves' ghosts, but seemed so realistic. The more she fled, the more determination the wolves had to hunt her down. All of a sudden, she misstepped. As she glimpsed up, she noticed the beasts were gone. Was it her imagination, or perhaps it was a nightmare or something more problematic? So I think you can see the progression in kind of confidence with writing between the three, all using the same structure, all having the same stimulus, But all, I think, have done a really good bit of writing that would have met the learning objective and has shown some real consideration of language choices, and they have all done a variety of different sentence structures and have used punctuation marks really well. Their vocabulary choices and some of the extra things they've added in, as you get kind of to the more confident writers, you can see they're more confident writers with some of their choices. But even those that are not so confident have done a really, really lovely job at that piece of writing. So that worked really well. In year 6, we've also used the similar structure for another piece of writing. So at Christmas time, we looked at The Truce, which was the Sainsbury's advert from a long, long time ago, actually. Now, it doesn't feel that long ago to me, but my current year 6 class, I don't think we were born when it came out or something disturbing. So we looked at this and did similar structure with our lessons to build up to writing a longer piece, but one of these chunks was slow written. I should have said, sorry, with the Chaperon Rouge, that middle bit was slow written, and then they had to go back and write the beginning of the story and the end of the story. And the idea there is that, you know, they've slow written the middle bit really successfully. They should now have in their mind an example of what worked really well, and what made an effective piece of writing that hopefully they'll independently start to drip feed into the 2 not structured, not scaffolded paragraphs that they were expected to write. So again, we did the same with The Truce. We slow wrote the middle section of our advert retell, and then they had to go back and do the beginning at the end and hopefully make it just as fantastic sounding. So I had prepared a model beforehand, just like I did with the other one. We picked it apart as a class, looking at the different types of sentence construction or word choices, sentence choices that I had used. And that, again, fed into our slow writing structure. So the structure of all these lessons are very similar. It's familiar to the children, so they can use these things confidently the more they're exposed to them. So this is a slightly longer piece here, 12 sentences, but still just kind of a little paragraph we needed. And using my model, using the slow writing structure that we developed together, children had to go at writing their own. So this is one of their examples here. If you haven't seen the Truce advert, it's about the football match on Christmas Day on no man's land in World War One. So we were moving on to our kind of war and peace topic. So this kind of started it. Petrified, alone, afraid, could this Christmas take a turn for the best? Craven, Jimmy clenched his glove as tightly as ever as he rose from the trenches, terrified. A panicked, startled German comrade spied Jimmy as he raised his cap and alerted his fellow soldiers of what could be an attack in the future of the wicked, woeful war. The German infantry were stunned because they were to grab their deadly weapons immediately. Astonishingly, Jim cautiously carried on his trek to reach the German, that should be base, trembling with every step he took. Horrified, frightened, panicked, Jim's commando officer went berserk at the fact that Jim was climbing out of the safe but oxidized trench. He shouted, "Jim, don't do it, Jim, it's not worth it." But would Jim follow these orders? Although Jim had heard this warning loud and clear, he proceeded to stumble his way along the icy snow. Would Jim be shot down? Could things take a turn for the best? Would this be his last Christmas? Only time would tell. So again, a variety of different sentence structures there. We've got a variety of different punctuation marks, including a hyphen. We've got speech marks in there. We've got ellipses, question marks that are used well, exclamation marks, which wouldn't necessarily all be used, not in one paragraph, without having looked at, oh yeah, I can use a variety and it's really effective. I've looked in the model and I'm following the structure. So it works really well in year 6. They've got a lot of obviously built up knowledge about different punctuation marks, different sentence constructions. They've got a bit of a good idea of what sounds really good because lots of them are very confident readers and they read a lot. So you can have some really lovely in-depth discussions with children a bit higher up in the school. But we do use it lower down as well, and it works nicely in a different way, but still successfully in year 2, for example. So this is an example from year 2. They had read Zog and did lots of literacy work about Zog, had practiced some of our different Alan Peat sentences. We've got a progressive model for introducing Alan Peat sentences across the school. So obviously year 2 will have less and they will be slightly simpler sentences, but they can still use them in the same way. So they looked at Zog, practiced some sentences, and then they were innovating the Zog story to replace the Zog character with another creature of their choice. So they had previously, before writing up their story, story mapped it, they planned it, they already knew what they were going to write about, all those lovely things that we do before while we're preparing children to write. And then again, the teacher would have a model. So to write the beginning of their story, the teacher has constructed a model. You can see here that the sentences have been broken down by the Year 2 teacher into different colours to make it really clear for the children. So the teacher had modelled Madam Unicorn around a school many moons ago. She taught young unicorns all the things that unicorns need to know. A beautiful silver unicorn was the most enthusiastic of all, and she tried her hardest every day to win the shimmering golden bow. All the unicorns in Year 1 were learning to shoot a beautiful bright rainbow out of their horns. Amazed, excited, delighted, the foals could not wait to have a go themselves. Now that you've been shown, you can practice on your own, Madam Unicorn explained, and off the unicorn foals went. So there would be discussion then with the children about what they can see. So they would have probably picked out there that yellow sentence is a 2AD sentence that they would have practiced, 2 adjectives before the noun, beautiful silver unicorn. They would also probably have picked out independently there the 3ED sentence in green, amazed, excited, delighted, the foals could not wait to have a go themselves. They would have done previous vocabulary work on ED words and probably doing a shades of meaning there as well. There's speech marks in a sentence there they probably would have recognised in that black sentence. And then the teacher has broken down some other things there to help them structure the beginning of their story. So you can see there at the bottom, your first 2 sentences, used first 2 sentences to explain what the teacher did. So she ran a school, she taught young unicorns, so theirs would be different depending on their plans. Then she wanted them to use a 2AD sentence about the character and what they want to win. So again, not just giving them 2AD sentence, but making it a bit easier for our Year 2 learners and saying what the sentence needs to be about. Then we've got a blue sentence, what does Madam Dragon teach them? Then we've got our 3ED sentence about how the pupils feel. And then you've got a sentence with speech marks. Your teacher in your story needs to say something. And can you use speech marks around those? So there's a word bank given to them as well. Make reference of that when they are constructing their work. So making sure they are exposed to lots of vocabulary. Make sure they know what they mean. Give them sheets to help them choose words for themselves. A little reminder there, capital letters and full stops, as always. And then this is their examples. This was their beginning to their own Zog story. So they carried on and wrote a beginning and then a middle and an end. So this is their beginning that had been slow written. One of the children. Madam Cat ran a school many moons ago. She was teaching all the 3-headed cats all the things that 3-headed cats need to know. Whiskers, a scary brown 3-headed cat, was the smartest. He worked so hard every day to get a shiny big crown. All the 3-headed cats in Year 1 were learning to blow shiny bright fire. Excited, elated, amazed, the 3-headed cats could not wait to practice by themselves. You can see there's some spelling things you need to go back and change. There's a couple of me looking at it as a teacher, commas that she's forgotten in some sentences, but they're things that you can go back and reflect on, probably with the teacher, do some verbal feedback with the writer as they're younger and probably not going to necessarily pick up on all of those things by themselves. But again, you know, it's a variety of sentences there, a nice start to a story that kind of sets the scene for the rest of the adventure that they're going to be writing about. So it worked really well in Year 2. Similarly, in Year 2, I did this when I was in there ages ago. It was the Man on the Moon, John Lewis advert, and we were writing about that. So we used the video as a stimulus rather than a book. We had looked through different word choices. We were learning 2AD sentences. So we had clips from the video. You could use clips from a book, obviously. We've got our nouns, man, moon, and then we talked about adjectives. How could we describe both of these things? We did lots of vocabulary work to build up to our writing. We had a model, which we were able to identify different things on as a class here on the board. So once on the distant rocky moon lived an old wrinkly man. That's actually a 4AD sentence. There's 2 nouns and then there's 2 adjectives before each. He was lonely because he was the only man living in space. An ad sentence, for example. Would he ever get back to Earth to see the people he knew and loved? That's a question. So again, similar structure we as a class went through and identified things that we could spot in the model. And then the model turns into our slow writing structure. So that was kind of the whole thing that we did, which would have been chunked. We wouldn't give the children all that in one go. You can see there they've got a success criteria that they needed to make sure they were referring to. A word map there again to help them pick better words, but we'd have gone through all of these. There's the shades of meaning on there. We'd have done some vocabulary work before doing our slow writing. And then this was the writing that came from that, a small piece. Once on the distant rocky moon lived an old wrinkly man. He felt lonesome, lonesome because he was the only man living in space. Will anyone ever rescue me? Every day he walked up the dusty moon hills to sit on a brown bench. A tear would trickle down his face like a snake slithering down a soft pink mountain. Dejected, troubled, isolated, he stared at the earth. So a variety of sentences, variety of punctuation, different sentence constructions there, quite impressive vocabulary. Dejected, for example, would not have come to a child's mind unless it had been taught. So it had been taught. These are all words that mean sad and lonely. We can put them in a sentence at the beginning of the sentence to make it really impactful. So lots of explanations about why these things work and why they're effective in this context. So there's been lots of stuff about writing fiction, writing stories, descriptive bits, but it works really well for non-fiction as well. So this is an example from a year 4 piece of work. They were doing about, their project was about chocolate, and they've been learning about fair trade chocolate and why buying fair trade is good. So you can see there again on the screen, we had a model there. I had written a model beforehand to write a persuasive argument, and we had picked out what I had used. All of these things have been taught beforehand. They'd had a chance to practice these types of sentences, either in previous year groups or new in the year 4 year group. Do you want to eat chocolate made by happy legal adults, or do you want to eat chocolate made by frightened illegal children? So there's a little combination of things there. We've got adjectives, it's a boys, but also there's 2 questions. Global chocolate makers such as Nestle and Hershey's use cocoa beans produced on farms that use children as slaves. I strongly believe that the use of children, who are often sold by their parents, in the production of chocolate is wrong and must be stopped. That's a noun, who, which, where sentence from Alan Peat. Many young, innocent children in the Southern Hemisphere are working on cocoa farms for little or no money and in dangerous conditions. A 2AD sentence. And so on and so forth. So children would recognise these themselves. Oh yeah, you're using one of these. Oh, that sounds really good. Which then, as you can see at the bottom, translates once again into our slow writing structure. So when they're writing their own persuasive argument, they need to start with a negative positive question. Then their second sentence needs to state the problem. Their third sentence needs to be a noun, who, which, where. So give them some extra help there. State your opinion at this point, and so on and so forth. And that will also translate really well to non-fiction writing. And often it works really, really well for that, because that's something that they don't necessarily do as much. Some of them like writing stories, don't they? Or they write lots of independent stories in their free time or at home. It's not often that a child is going to go home and write a persuasive argument. So it works really well to get some quite sophisticated sounding writing, and children can understand that themselves, especially when I did this with my year 4s a few years ago. They were really proud of what they wrote, because it was an unusual sounding piece of writing to them, really. So it was a new thing to be writing about, but they could recognise that it sounded sophisticated and it sounded powerful, and it did the job that it needed to try persuade people and give them lots of information, for example. So it works across different types of writing as well, really successfully, and we use it across both regularly in Glasllwch Primary School. So since introducing slow writing, it's had a great impact on our writing across the school. We found that those kind of lower ability, middle ability children that can find writing tricky sometimes are using a greater range of punctuation. They don't really have much choice if they're following the structure and following our Alan Peat sentences. But if you don't use Alan Peat sentences, you know, whatever kind of sentence constructions you're using, punctuation needs to be used accurately. So they're using that in their writing. The same children are using a greater range of sentence structures in their writing. The kind of more higher ability children and the matched children, who are already good writers, are more mindful of different sentence structures for emphasis and effect, although they probably might write in different ways naturally. If they're kind of gifted writers, they're a bit more mindful of the variety of different ways you could write a sentence and why they're so impactful. All children are able to apply sentence structures to other pieces of writing then, and some get transferred more than others, but we do see other Alan Peat sentences sneak into other pieces of writing because they practice in such a structured way. But all children are using a wider range of adventurous vocabulary. We spend a lot of time on it, and they can recognise that it sounds really good. There is a bit of a warning to using it though. Like the secret sentences, the Alan Peat sentences, the slow writing does have its place. You shouldn't overuse it. It can become really constraining and quite boring, especially if it's overused for really long pieces of writing. If they've got to follow really specific instructions for too long a time, it loses its impact there. Um, it can potentially constrain the higher ability and the MAT learners who are naturally gifted writers and have got a good idea of what they want to do. So at times it can constrain them. So giving them too long a piece with too much of a structure can be frustrating for those children sometimes that just want to write in their own way. It can limit the flow. Writing sentence by sentence can sometimes, if children aren't kind of thinking really carefully about how the sentences go together, sometimes have a little bit of a chippy choppy paragraph. So editing is key to that. You need to go back and check that things make sense and add little bits in if it doesn't flow very well. And that's obviously easier as you get higher up the school. You do need to take care choosing appropriate sentences and how you as the model are structuring your work. If children are going to copy it literally sentence by sentence, you do need to take a lot of time and a lot of care thinking about what works really well. And the aim is always to remove those structures for independent writing. They should not be writing within slow written scaffold forever. And once you've done it a few times, remove it or do a paragraph and remove it for the rest of it. So we're aiming for independent writers. The slow writing scaffold helps them to practice really good writing, like the David Dowd quote at the beginning. You know, they often sometimes can practice and just practice not so successful writing. So we're letting them practice really successfully for a small chunk, which hopefully then transfers over time. So I hope that's been of some use and that you've got some ideas about how we have introduced and used slow writing across the school at Glasllwch Primary School. As I said, it's been really successful for us. It's nice to see children creating their own success criteria. They can peer assess and self-assess with the criteria really clearly. We really like using it here, but in the right context and not overusing it, as I said. So thank you very much. If you are interested in finding out any more about it, the David Didow Learning Spy blog, as I said, is really good. But I'm happy to answer any questions, or if you want to come and see something or have any thing you'd like extra from me, you're welcome to email me there on my email, which is ksummers@glasllwch.org.uk, and I will get back to you. But thank you very much, everybody, and have a nice day.